Uh, uh, okay, Rakesh, recording is started now. So welcome to Urdu Hindi boot camp. As I mentioned, the topic of the day is the power of data event Dynamics 365 FNO with Power Platform. So you may well start your session.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you so much, Faisal and Pakistan User Group organizers for giving me an opportunity to talk. It is great to see all of you taking the time to be here, and it's always honored to have a chance to spend some time with these amazing community members. So hi everyone, I wish you good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining in from. So let me start by introducing myself. So I am Rakesh Darge. In addition to being a senior solution architect at TCS Mumbai here in India, a certified trainer and a member of Dynamic 365 Power Community User Group here in India. I'm also group leader of user group up in India. Aside from this, I write a blog post on Dynamics 365 for finance and operations and Power Platform. I'm very proud of this year accomplishment where Microsoft has recognized my skill set this area into specific to finance and operation apps as a FastTrack recognized architect. In terms of my introduction, I grew up in the IT. I have been working with Microsoft Stack all of my professional career. Got my start working in application programming, that is VC++ and Visual Basic way back before I moved into this ERP space in 2009. And later I moved to Dynamics 365 FNO, earlier known as Dynamics AX, and back in 2005. In terms of my focus, I exclusively focus on Dynamics 365 FNO for last 15 years, and recently I turned my attention to Power Platform customer engagement apps, enabling cross apps learning to everyone. So we at a solution architecture team helps customer in their implementation and resolve their business challenges into modular cloud ERP, that is Dynamics 365 FNO, by guiding them through their digital transformation journey. If you refer my one pager bio on my LinkedIn portal, you'll also see I also wrote a couple of blogs and a white paper on self-governing model ERP, how that future of look like of modular cloud ERP. I highly encourage you to go through the same and try to see what best you can leverage from that learning. You can always, reach out to me through Twitter or LinkedIn, whatever things that I mentioned, or maybe through email as well. One of the things, I always passionate about technology and help customer to resolve their problems with bringing a new technology stack, one Dynamics, one platform, and try to help customers, to design their end-to-end business processes, the integration landscape, and try to build, the seamless event-driven architectures, predominantly focusing on low-code, no-code technologies, try to help and empower their pro developer or citizen developer team. So in terms of the agenda today, as part of these sessions, we will cover following topic. We will start with the basic understanding of what is virtual entity and data events. I know virtual entity has been there maybe more than 2 years now. However, it is a new concept for FNO in addition to the data events. Then we will try to focus on the what business problems are you trying to solve by using the virtual entities and data events. Then we will talk about the virtual entities or virtual tables configurations, a bare minimum configurations. And then we will also touch base on how the authentication and authorization mechanism works when you try to enable the virtual tables in Dataverse in the context of data entity of FNO. Towards the end, we will also look at the high-level architecture, how the virtual entity data event framework works. I will not go into more detail because it will be more technology-based driven, but I'll just try to capture the bunch of artifacts that requires your data events pipeline to be up and running when there is a concept of a virtual entity comes into picture from a Dataverse side, and how it gets tightly integrates or couples with data entity concept of FNO. Then we will also see the key components to enable the Power Apps integration. You might have seen or you might have learned that many customers maybe they have existing Power App solution without Dataverse or with Dataverse, or another scenario where the customer have their finance and operation app and they wanted to leverage the Power Apps, or they wanted to leverage a customer engagement app, predominantly Dataverse or without Dataverse. How can we leverage and how can we enable that? So we'll just try to touch base some of the key aspects of those integrations, and then towards the end demo, but obvious, right? Because that will help you to give you some set of reinforcements towards the concepts that we are going to cover through this presentation day. Right? So before we jump in, there are a few prerequisites that let me just call out for this session, because this session in next 45 minutes, you might sound me, I'm going a little bit faster because there are a bunch of topics I'm planning to cover in next 45 minutes or so. That's the reason I wanted to cover the theoretical piece more in detail, and then try to give as much as time to address your questions, if any, and the practicality of that subject, but obvious. So this session is built upon the some foundational topics like Dynamics 360 or finance, supply chain management, or maybe of Power Apps or business events, data events, or some sort of cross apps integration. Since we are going to talk about the integration with Dynamics 365 apps in combination of finance and operation as a ERP and the Power Apps, you are also expected to understand the basics of integrations, which is OData protocol, which is REST, and the OAuth 2.0. Okay, I'm sure Faizan and team must have mentioned in the beginning of the previous session with Ramit as well. If you have any questions, try to put those questions in the chat window, and I'll try to pause in between time to time, and I'll try to answer. If not, maybe towards the end I'll spend some 5 or 7 minutes or so, and then we'll focus and address those questions. Okay, let's move on to next slide. So basically, when you talk about or when you think about the cross-app integration, right, in the context of Dynamics 365 family product, right, the key is to ensuring the robust integration, and is all completely based on the data, right? Everything is talking about data. So if you look at the virtual entity or the virtualization as a concept, right, has existed in the industry for some time. As I mentioned, it's more than 2 years now. And I think those who come from a background of customer engagement or Power Apps, this concept is not new to them, because they have been using this concept multiple times while trying to bring the data from the external source. However, when customers are using their siloed data where someone needs to access the data, they need to react on the data, right? This virtuality becomes nothing but some sort of the abstraction layer where user does not need to know where the data resides, but they're just simply based on how the data is lying on the form or a query or UI, and just to access it, right? In fact, in my view, it allows user to, the real-time on-demand access of data as and when they need. In the context of today's session, the external data source which we are going to use as part of this virtual table concept is a finance and operation app, right? So what we understood is a formal definition of virtual entity, which actually nothing but allows is a platform which allows you to connect the external data sources, which is a finance and operation app in this context, and try to enable the full create, read, update, and delete operations from a Dataverse and a platform, Power Platform perspective, right? As we move further, the one of the topic that I was focused and try to focus, give you more focus to attention, that because technology is changing fast, right? However, when we will have a dialogue with a customer always asks question, right? Why you need the virtual entity? What level of, the business problem statements that you are going to resolve by enabling? Customer also understand that there are the set of or a bunch of configurations to be enabled. However, by enabling the configuration, what level of benefits the business is going to get, right? So I just try to list down 7 or 8, I would say, benefits of the virtual entity, if at all, if there is need for the particular project to be required. But based on my experience, I just tried to highlight this. One of them, it's a visualized purpose, right? So if you have any particular use case where you strongly feel that your data to be represent or to be visualized from external sources, and the use case says no data to be staged somewhere in Dataverse or somewhere, then I think this is one of the benefit which will help business users to leverage the virtual entity. Another important factor to be noted here is it's out of the box capability of the product. So there is no running cost associated, right? There is no additional license is required in terms of components to be installed and components to be configured. However, the license is required when there is a authentication and authorization factors comes into picture, which we'll cover in subsequent slide. Another big impact on the project budget, because every project runs on a specific budget, right? So if you have this sort of concepts in your implementation, which helps the biggest impact on your project, where the low storage cost of Dataverse as the data resides in effect. So think about a scenario when you deploy the Dataverse first time, you need at least a minimum 1 or 2 GB of data space, and as and when your data increases, you need to pay the additional cost on top of that, right? That is where this is one of the biggest advantage as an implementer can use. Another aspect when it comes to integration, design, and if you go with this virtual entity, it does not require any sort of development resources. It does not require any sort of integration orchestration tool or some sort of other component. It comes with out of the box with a straightforward step-by-step configuration, bunch of documentations are available. You can easily refer. It also helps having a less impact on the timelines and the budget. So if you have a use cases which is cross app sort of scenario, I think this is one of the best approach that you can leverage and win-win situation for customers and partners. Another aspect that I have personally seen in one of the customers or many customers with whom I'm talking, that where is my data is going, right? So by enabling this sort of technology stack, your data resides in FNO, right? So the risk of having a data that is out of sync is never a problem, because FNO maintains data, and as and when a need basis, your Power Apps or customer engagement users are going to leverage that data as and when it's required, right? In addition to this, it comes with the power of low code and no code. It means everything is built on top of Dataverse, right? So you can leverage model-driven app, you can leverage Canvas app, you can also leverage customer engagement and Power Portal for that matter, right? Another one of the aspect that I would like to highlight as part of one of the use case that I have learned with many customer implementation, that it leverage the power of Power Automates and the Logic app. So if there is any particular, the business use case where you strongly feel that that particular use case required a process automation, then a virtual entity seamlessly work with Power Automate as well as the Power or as well as the Logic apps as well. So let us move on and try to touch base some of the key aspects of the virtual table or virtual entities, the configurations. So as you can see here in the presentation deck, I just try to highlight uh, the required and the bare minimum setup that is required. However, if you refer the documentation on Teams or on a Microsoft Learn side, you'll find bunch of good articles over there, and so step by steps. So one of the things when you want to enable the virtual tables or entity, first and foremost, you need Dynamics 365 ERP virtual entity solution that you can download from App Source, and that you need to install in your Dataverse environments. As a next step, you need to focus more on the virtual data source configuration. We will see in actions when we will do the practicality of this particular use case, where in the virtual data source configuration, you define the your target URL, which is your financial operation app URL, then your OAuth URL, your AAD token, AAD application ID, so on and so forth, right? All these information is managed within the Dataverse, so that whenever there is a need a data source to be built on top of the data entity, the Power Apps, that is a Dataverse, can easily do that. Another aspect that you need to configure as part of the virtual table or virtual entity, which is your the available data entity, which is an advanced view in the Dataverse side. So I'll show in a few seconds once we through with this slide deck. Now I'll move on to the next slide. So the next slide talks about the authorization and authentication, right? So where whenever the Power Apps or a Dataverse users try to access any data entity as part of the virtual table in Dataverse, it goes service to service calls. It means it's a call that is happening over the wire, and the user who is accessing the data through the data entity or a virtual entity of Dataverse from the finance and operation apps, that user should exist in the Power Apps. That is how in technology term we call as the user impersonates the view, right? So it's how the the information that is being read or update or create from that operation of virtual table, that happens only and only through the impersonates records that is being passing through the Power Apps or a Dataverse. Right? It requires set of security roles in addition to the business role that is going to assign. And as I mentioned earlier, it runs on a user context. So if I'm a user in Power Apps and as per my segregation of duty, I do not require access to finance and operation app because my roles and duties are within the boundary of Power Apps. But if you have the virtual entity, my user ID should exist in both, that is in Power Apps as well as in finance and operation app. Otherwise, I will not be able to read or I will not be able to update any sort of activity which I'm planning to run against the data. It could be read, it could be update, or it could be delete. So that is how it works in terms of authorization and authentication. So now you can see that you have got to the definition and the configuration side of the virtual entity. Now let us move ahead and talk about the high level architecture of this particular concept of virtual entity and data events alongside of virtual entity. You can read this slide from your left to right. So the left side, which is my source, which is my finance and operation app. The idea behind is that finance and operation app has a bunch of data entity. It maintains the data events catalog as part of the business events. And as part of setup, which I highlighted in this particular slide deck, which is highlighted in different color, which is nothing but the setup that we have seen in previous slide, which actually configured with the help of virtual table providers, which is part of Dataverse. But just for your information, Dataverse does provide a bunch of other technology stack as well as far as the virtual tables providers concerned. I have just highlighted OData because that is very specific to finance and operation app. However, it does support Cosmos DB, SQL Server, and Visual Studio as well. But just in the context of today's discussion, I just try to highlight OData because that is how it is being used for finance and operation app. As you can see here in the slide deck, that is how the setup. As soon as the data entity or any actions happens through a UI of finance and operation app, it triggers the actions, which is create, update, and delete, which is data actions. And there are a bunch of bound actions that we are going to see in a few minutes time in the Visual Studio, how we can record that. And then you'll get the three set of bound actions. One is the on external created, on external updated, and on external deleted. These are nothing but the actions that comes with the plugin steps, and it allows you to write your business logic. So as and when any actions happen in finance and operation app in the context of this presentation day, then it will start calculating, it will start executing that business logic that you recorded on that particular event, which is on external created or updated or deleted. And that plugin will start focusing and synchronizing the steps, and that will reflect a data into a Dataverse table. Right? So as you can see here in the slide deck, I just try to highlight a bunch of observation as well. As we speak, it does only support asynchronous step for that plugin step, because the pre-validation and pre-operations execution stage, in addition to the synchronous executions modes, are not currently supported for virtual entity. So if you are planning to design and leverage the data entity, data events concepts, try to make a note of these limitations and accordingly plan for your business use cases to be handled by the virtual entity and the data events. So with that, I'll just quickly move on to next slide. So next slide is focused more on the key components to enable on Power Apps integration data events. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the session, that a customer may have a two different scenario. The very first customer scenario where they may have their initial Power Platform environment. It could be without Dataverse, it could be with Dataverse. And the other scenario could be they might have some environments which they are using a financial operation app, but they need to now enable few more additional use cases for their business need, which is going to enable a Dataverse or a customer engagement app, right? So a couple of things to be noted here. One, in the context of first scenario, which is Power Platform environment is already exists and there is no existence of finance and operation app. In this case, when you purchase the first time, you receive a Power Platform environment without a Dataverse, which is linked to your financial app. That's how the by default strategy or by default mechanism is going to be invoked, because you might have seen the last release updates from Microsoft and a bunch of tech talk sessions from FastTrack team as well. The platform convergence theme is going on where the FNO environment in terms of deployment, which is currently exists in LCS, is going to be part of the Power Platform Admin Center, right? So as part of that strategy, when you receive an initial Power Platform environment without Dataverse, you will, which is linked to your FNO, that is a one-to-one relationship, right? And then you can connect the finance and operation environment during the setup of Power Platform integration, if at all, if there is a one particular use case. One thing to be noted, if you want this capability of virtual entity and your right to be enabled, then you need to have the enable Dynamics 365 apps. There is an option enable when you create a Dataverse environment. That needs to be enabled because all the bunch of solution which is required for virtual entity to be up and running, in addition to the solution that you are going to build as part of your use cases, it requires Dynamics 365. Otherwise, your financial operation app integration with Dataverse is not going to be enabled. It's going to be failed. Right. Another important point to be noted here that your Power Platform environment must be in the same geography as your financial operation app, just to manage the latency. Otherwise, you will start facing the challenges with the performance while reading the data from financial operation apps. Right. Another aspect, if you look at on the right hand side, which is enabling the integration for your cloud hosted environment, which is a second scenario, as I mentioned earlier, where you need to focus on the use case where environment of finance and operation app is currently exists, and then customer wants to enable some additional capability for their set of use cases in the context of customer engagement app, or for that matter power apps. Then in that case there are some manual steps that you need to perform, which is enabled on the Microsoft portal as well. I already performed that activity on my VM just to have that integration to be up and running. But in addition to this, there is a PowerShell command that you need to execute, which actually try to build or modify the AOS web.config file from a FNO perspective and try to help the integration channel to be up and running. And so trying to highlight some sort of the key component which you require to keeping in mind when you talk about the Power Apps integration with data events with the finance and operation app to be enabled. Right.
Rakesh, I want
So
to
with
give
that,
you a time check. Yeah, we just have 5 minutes left for this session, and we have the next speaker lineup. So I would appreciate if you can wrap up your. Thank you.
I think I'll take 15 minutes more because earlier session got overrun. Okay, because of the previous one. I'll try to cover and I'll try to wrap it up in next 10-15 minutes or so. Is that okay?
So basically, his session started at quarter to 5. So he still have, sorry, quarter to 6. So he still have another 20 minutes.
All right.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Okay, so let's quickly look at the demo and the business scenario. So what we are going to see, so now we have learned what is virtual entity. We also talked about the concept of virtual entity with data events. We also saw a bunch of configuration which is required your data entity to be enabled as part of the FNO ERP virtual solution, virtual entity solution, as well as some additional settings to be configured in the Azure Active Directory, so on and so forth. Now we will see the create business scenario. So what scenario indicates here? We will try to create a vendor record in finance and operation apps. Okay, and business wants as soon as the vendor information is being created in financial operation app, it should automatically create a one task activity in the the Dataverse, which is a task entity in Dataverse or a customer engagement app. As soon as we create that, they need a timestamp for that task activity for the from a follow-up perspective with the vendor in a 7 days, right? So they need that follow-up to be happen within the 7 days. Then they need to also capture some of the information which they have captured or the financial operation app users captured in the vendor information, which is vendor name, vendor group, etc., etc. And that also needs to be passed on as a reference. If I talk about in technical term, as argument reference of that vendor data entity of financial operation app to the database, right? And then it creates an automatic task in a database, right? So this is what a business scenario. And in the interest of time, I'll just try to compile the scenario and the try to fast forward the technicality of that aspect. But if you have any question, post that, we can easily connect through chat of LinkedIn or Twitter, and then we'll get into a more detailed discussion. So I'll take a pause here. I'll stop my presentation and I'll try to reshare my screen where I'll share my environment, and then we'll continue to the steps from the FNO perspective, from the Power Apps of configuration perspective, as well as the business scenario that we just talked about, where we will see how to leverage that scenario by enabling the additional capability in virtual entity. I hope my screen is visible. Can someone confirm?
Yeah, it is visible, Rakesh.
Okay, perfect. So I have logged into my Power Apps Dataverse environments. I do have a bunch of solutions. I do have a bunch of tables created as part of the initial table creation process of Dataverse. And what we have seen in the presentation take earlier, that it requires some sort of configurations, right? So as you can see here, this is the Dataverse advanced setting. In the advanced setting in the Dataverse admin, you'll see a virtual data source entity for financial operation app. Let me just quickly go back and open that UI again. You can navigate here and you will see a virtual data entity data source. Underneath of the data source, you will see a financial operation as a data source, and this gets automatically installed when the automatically install the solution called data, this one, Dynamics 365 ERP virtual entity. Once it is done, then you can go back and filter your record. I think I have already opened in the interest of time. You can see here, I have already opened and enable one of the data entity of financial operation app. I have already visible that data entity for our demo purpose, but you can easily go back and filter. You can select the option over here as available financial operation app entity. You can name that entity. You can use a bunch of filters over here. I will not go into detail because most of the time I have seen it takes a lot of time and we have limited time for this session. So I'll just take I'll minimize this. So what I'll do, I have already created a solution. So one of the important aspect that we need to keeping in mind, when you want to enable the virtual entity in the context of data events, then you need a blank solution to be created. I have already created the solution here, but you can simply go ahead and create a new solution. Let me just quickly go back and you can create a new solution over here. Name your solution, specify the publisher. I have selected default publisher. In your case, you can select your publisher based on your best practices that is being used in the organization. And then this blank template that has been automatically solution template that has been created by the Power Apps for me. Now I'll navigate to Visual Studio. Once you navigate to Visual Studio, you may need to run the Visual Studio on admin or run as admin mode. Once you navigate this, you need to select a respective template, right? So when you create projects and try to search for the Power Platform templates. In my environment, I have already installed this Power Platform solution template. In your case, you may not have this Power Platform solution template because this is a solution template is required for virtual entity data events to be, enabled or configured. So what you can do, you can navigate to the extensions here, the manage extensions, search for the extension of Power Platform, and you will find that particular Power Platform tools. In my case, I already installed, so I will not reinstall again. Once you do that, then you will select the projects. The project will allow you to, if I'm going to select this next, it will allow you to select the project name, the Visual Studio project name. As soon as you click that, then it will ask you to select which environment that you want to create. So in my case, I'll select my environments, which is trying to connect to Dataverse. I can select a display available list, login, so on and so forth. Now, in the interest of time, I already create a solution for you. As you can see here, once you do that, automatically you will see an option called Power Platform Explorer here, which gets which get installed when you enable the solution template for Power Platform tools, and which is nothing but the same replica of Make or Make.app portal, the Power App portal. It's a maker portal experience that you are seeing in the Visual Studio, nothing more than that. So let's give a 2 minutes. Sometimes it takes a lot of time to open. So as you can see here, this is a Power Platform portal that I have enabled. Once you navigate to this, there is a focus on the integration catalog. Underneath of the catalog, if your configuration is done correctly, you will see a bunch of modules name, because these modules represent the data entity, and the data entity module names comes from your table groups, the way you have configured. In our scenario, we are going to use a vendor V2 entity. So you can see here the vendor V2 entity is going to be enabled, which is a prefix of MSERP, which is by default virtual entity gives a prefix. Once you do that, then it will allow you to select, give you 3 steps. You might have seen, if you refer my presentation deck, you'll find there are 3 actions, bound actions you will get, right? Now I have already created a 1 step here. In your case, you can right click on this and add plugins. As soon as you click on the add plugins, it asks you to register a new steps, which is nothing but a step which is going to be execute or action, you may call it out, underneath of this bound action on external created. So on external created allow you to capture the events on an external data source. In our case, it's a financial operation app, and then you can specify who is the calling user, whether you want that user context to be run against the user, whether you want event pipeline stages. At this stage, it does only allow post operation and the asynchronous mode, but it has pre-operations and pre-validations as well, and the synchronous as well. If you go with the synchronous, it will throw error message because it is not completely built at this stage. It is just focusing on the asynchronous, but I think in subsequent releases, you will see this option also going to be enabled, where the steps are going to be execute synchronous as well, right? And then you can specify the name of your messages, what type of message that you want to be created. So what I'm going to do, I already created a steps here. You can see here, I'll just quickly run through the solution artifacts. So once we understood the Power Platform Explorer and underneath of the steps that he created, it automatically creates solution projects over here. It also allows you to create your, the respective key, because that is one of the important aspects that you need to perform, which you can do. And by navigating to this solution, the projects and the property, and then signing with the strong name of that particular assembly, you can also specify the name and the password. Once it is done, it creates the C# class for you. Okay, if I put it that way, and the logic that you need to add into the method, which is a protected method, execute CDS plugin, right? As you can correlate here, this is this is nothing but your CDS, the plugin, and underneath of plugin you have these steps. Now you want that logic to be executed. You can see here, right from here until here, the logic that I have added here, that I'm trying to define the object of my task entity. I already defined the request entity, which is my target data source, which is my virtual data source of financial operation app. I'm passing the information, which is my fixed information, in the subject of task entity. And here in the description, I have taken the reference, which is the record that I'm getting from data entity in the context of get attribute value, because it's a string. So, but if it is int, you can define that. But the point which I'm trying to highlight, that if you want the data to be copied or data to be argument reference of that argument to be passed to Dataverse, this is the pattern that you need to use, get attribute value. And then I want a schedule start and schedule end date, which pretty simple, add 7 days plus for schedule started, and then the category, which is my primary name, and so on and so forth. Just for error handling, I added a context, and then also if I want to trace the Dataverse plugin, I've added a tracing service as well, so that I can go ahead and easily do the tracing as well, in case if I want to do a specific tracing or specific activity to be validated as part of plugin tool, right? So that's it. So I have added this 4 line of code. So what it does, whenever I'm going to create a vendor record, this vendor record is going to be automatically reference, automatically create my task entity. As soon as you compile and as soon as you deploy this, let me just quickly show you. When you deploy this, it pop-ups the dialog. It asks you to which steps that you will deploy. As you can see here, this is my solution name, and this is my target organization, which is my Dataverse environment, or Dataverse name. Here I can select. I can easily deploy this. Once I do that, then the information is going to be appear here as part of my solution that I have created, which is my plugging assembly and my steps. Okay, if you want these particular steps to be on and off, you can just navigate to these options and turn on and turn off, and you can do uh, if you want any troubleshooting to be happen against this particular, the steps. Now what I'll do, I think I can see we have 8 minutes. I'll quickly navigate to the vendor form. Let's go to the recent. I'll go to the vendor form. I'll quickly create a new vendor. Just copy the same name here. I'll select my group. I'll save. As soon as I save that, what happens is that the plugin gets fired based on a logic that we have written over here. This logic automatically calls, it gets the context here as a request entity. It passes the value from that context, which is my vendor account number. In this case, this is my vendor
Rakesh,
account number.
yeah, sorry for interrupting in between, but I just want to give you a time check. We have a hard step for this session after 5 minutes. So I would appreciate if you can wrap up the session in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Sure, I'll do that. Thanks. So I'll just quickly navigate to tables. I'll just quickly navigate to table on. I'll go to the view. So you can see here the vendor that we have created is appear in the task entity, which is a physical entity in the Dataverse, that is in Power Apps. Right? So this way you can achieve the virtual entity and virtual entity data events by leveraging the concept of the event framework. So with that, I'll take a pause here. I'll stop my sharing. If there are any questions, maybe next 2 or 3 minutes or so, else I'll hand over to organizing.
I think there are no questions. So thank you, Rakesh, so much for your time and for joining us today. It was very informative session, and I really appreciate your efforts in also showing us the hands-on demonstration of your session.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for your time.